All right, so today we're going to pick up actually doing a discussion here of iteration and loops. So we have some additional exercises here that my friend can work kind of on his own time as we go. He says he would rather we just keep going here. Once we knock out loops, and we'll probably do some exception handling as well. Well, at that point, we will have done quite a bit. Most of the things that you'll need to do actual functions. Now, of course, there's always more we can do. I may look into seeing if there's an easy way for us to um, basically emulate having a database, and then we can write some queries perhaps and see what the best way for Python to deal with databases is. But honestly, the core building blocks of programming, conditionals to control the flow of execution, and iteration to repeat statements, and variables and data types, and argument passing. And well, we will have done a lot of the basics after we finish here today. So I am briefly just going to make sure that we're comfortable with debugging. I think I've been emphasizing it properly, but debugging, very, very important tool skill for us as programmers. I actually noticed that this particular IDE doesn't actually have a step into. The step over will actually go inside of the, will actually go, oh, excuse me, will actually go inside of the functions, as you call them. In many development environments, if you press step over and you have a line with a function, it will actually step over the entire function, as in execute all the statements in the function call. But not this one, and that's fine. And that means that if you want to actually step over an entire function, what you should do is set a breakpoint and then continue to the breakpoint. So you can emulate this behavior very easily. What that might mean, for example, if we go up here and so here we have some variables and we define a function, and then we define on line 330, we're calling a function, right? Well, if I set a breakpoint on line 330 and we go ahead and we run this, so we'll end up stopped right before, well, it looks like we had a breakpoint there too. We'll end up stopped right before executing line 330. So in certain environments, if I were to press step over like this, it would actually go straight to line 331. We wouldn't get to see what happens inside of this function call from line 330. But actually here, when I press step, it's going to take me inside of this function call. And so line 330 is calling the first is leap year function, which is defined up here. And so we're actually going to end up on line 305 here, as you see right there. And so that right there is the step into. It's where when you press next, when you're stopped before a function call, you actually go inside of the function call rather than skipping the function call. And so what a step over would normally be in, for example, like Visual Studio, that's the example I'm thinking of, or Visual Studio Code. There's development environments that use for C# or Angular is what I write in VSCode. Well, that's, I believe, how the step functionality works in those. So if we just do this again, really what step over would be like in those environments is you would go from line 330, you press step over, and it would skip the function call. It would step over the entire line here, and that function call kind of being encapsulated in the line itself. And so you'd end up on line 331, just like that. But other than that, do you want me to talk any more about the debugger, or do you think you got it? Because we've already used it. We've already been over the basics of it, how you can see variables in your local scope in the debugger.
Yeah, I was just wondering if VS Code had it, but I think you just said it does. And I don't know if I'm just not using it right, or if I downloaded the wrong one. I'm not sure. I was using it yesterday, but I didn't know how to get to the debugger specifically.
So there's a run pane in VS Code. Let me see. I don't actually think I have any local projects down right now. One sec. We can drag it onto the screen that I'm sharing here. Where are you, window? Here we are. So that's the console. Don't need that. So you see this button over here on the left? Do you have a sidebar that looks something like this in your Visual Studio Code?
Let me see. Sorry, let me.
So one of the reasons why I'm having a stick to this online editor right now is because it automatically manages packages for us, and we don't have to worry about installing Python and versioning it and getting the proper version of packages and keeping package namespaces separate from each other. And I don't know if you have anything installed on your local machine, but you'll quickly find out that honestly, keeping your programming tools up to date and managed is actually one of the more difficult parts of being a programmer, rather than actually writing the code itself. Properly keeping packages and versions up to date and management configuration, I suppose, is one way of calling this, is actually it can be quite time consuming.
So I've checked, and it looks like what I have is just Visual Studio rather than Visual Studio Code. I'm not sure.
So I actually don't have Visual Studio installed on this computer. Visual Studio is the development environment for C#. I don't have it up in front of me here, but one sec. Let me see if I can just say Visual Studio. There should be at the top of your screen, right here. There should be, oops, that's not what I want. I just wanted this to, you're going to need a project to run first. Open link in image, new tab. So there should be at the top of your screen a button that says start. And
I have that.
Okay, that would be the run button. Now, if you want to debug, you go into the debug menu. And well, actually, no, you don't even have to. There is no separate run and not run, because unless you specifically choose right here in this drop down that says debug, unless you specifically choose something that says release, you will be debugging by default. And so you can set breakpoints the same way. The lines in Visual Studio, you might have to click on the line to the left of the line numbers rather than the line number itself, but it's the same idea.
But at the same time, I thought maybe I should just download the VS Code anyway. So I'm doing that now.
Okay. So Visual Studio is the main development environment for C#. The .NET Core framework is what I develop in my day job as a software engineer. Visual Studio Code is a general purpose text editor. Many people use it for a whole bunch of languages. You can install plugins for it that will, kind of help set up a good development environment for, I don't know, you can even do C#. Some of the guys on my team, I do too from time to time. Visual Studio Code has several features that are very nice. It has something called fuzzy search, which is if you press Control P, you can search for files by name. This isn't so impressive here just because I don't have a folder open right now. If I go to one of the directories here in this project, right now this directory isn't, let me go open up the project for my ministry website here in VS Code. Well, if I press Control P now, I can search for example, let's say I want to search for one of the shortcodes or one of the templates on my site for the side menu. I can just search for side menu, and you'll see I'll be able to pick between any of these. Well, this is something that VS Code has. There's some other really cool stuff. What's a good example? Let me find something that's bigger. If for whatever reason, okay, so you see how we have a whole bunch of things here that are like list item. Well, let's say I wanted to change the name of all of these at once. Well, I'm holding down the Alt key and I'm just clicking with my cursor. You can also do it like Control Alt and then use the arrow keys like this. Control Alt key, I mean, there is a faster way to do this. I always forget the keyboard shortcut to like highlight all of the matching things at once. But if I do this, I can actually like edit all of the lines at the same time. So that's something that VS Code lets you do. I think you can actually do it in Visual Studio as well. I mean, the shortcuts are different, a little bit different. VS Code is very, very popular. It's one of the most popular text editors. So if you get experience with it, depending on what team you might end up working on, it would not shock me if that's the default environment they use. Some of the more hardcore teams might use like actually Vim or Emacs if you have to like SSH into some place to do work. But my guess is that most Joe Schmo developers probably end up using VS Code or something like it. Now Visual Studio, it's a bit older. Now they actually just released Visual Studio 2022 a few weeks ago. Now Visual Studio 22 is the first 64-bit version of Visual Studio, which means it will probably end up being more resource intensive, use more memory and stuff. But I still, in my day job, typically use Visual Studio for the back end. And then whenever I'm doing any of my TypeScript stuff, so the JavaScript front end for our project, I use VS Code for that. Now, like I said, some folks on my team use VS Code for everything. I just kind of like having the split there. It doesn't matter too much. That's the other thing that you'll figure out eventually is that some people just get obsessed with their tools and optimizing every small detail about it. I used to be like that a little bit more. Now I really am a little bit more hands-off. I do use some plugins that are very useful. That's what VS Code has, plugins here. Spell checkers, and here particularly most of this stuff is like for Markdown. But at work, I have a plugin that lets me sort lines alphabetically. So if I'm declaring a bunch of variables, I want to keep the list alphabetical. We have linters installed. A linter is something that basically checks your code for code style and stuff like that. Are you declaring variables but not using them? Well, you generally don't want to do that. If you're not going to use the variable, why did you declare it? It kind of clutters your code, things like that. So anyway, at some point, we will probably want to, I will start teaching you the basics of version control as well. And so we'll start out on the command line, just so that you get an idea of what command line get is like. And in practice, in the real world, what I use day to day and what many people use are called SSH keys to access repositories, which means that rather than, that's not as opposed to command line. You use SSH keys on the command line too. Many of us use a visual Git tool like this. And so, for example, this is the version control repository for my ministry website. And these are all the changes. I've been bad. I haven't been committing a lot. I've just been doing a lot of work because, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a team or anything. It's just me on the repository. So you get to see all of the changes to the files that I've made here. Red means removed, green means added. Since I've last updated the changes here. So I've removed a bunch of stuff and but we'll get to this eventually. But one of the reasons why I didn't start us off with all this, as you can see, I just barely scratched the surface. And if you're not confused, you at least have a lot to think about, right? One of the benefits for us starting here is that we don't have nearly as much we have to worry about, right? However, version control, managing version control, dealing with branches and commits and merging. That is a very, very important part of, that's a very important part of being a software developer. Anytime you work on a team, you will have to deal with that environment. So we will go over it. I will teach you. The other thing is probably, as we kind of talked about at the beginning, I have this link to this tutorial here for Django. If you decide that web development is the path that you are interested in gaining experience in, it's the only one that I would probably be of much use in past a certain point, because I know the basics of how a desktop and mobile development, those are probably in production environments, the other two paths that you would take. Mobile development would be developing applications for phones like Android or iOS, and then desktop would be, just things that aren't web apps, but things focused that normal programs that you would download and execute. Desktop apps would tend to be much more resource hungry. So what's a good example? Like word processing software or, video editors or whatever. Well, all of those are, I don't know all of them, but they're typically written in C, C++. They have bigger computational demands in general. I don't want to throw too much information at you. Some people are trying to shift the performance of web apps stronger as well. There's something called WebAssembly. I may have mentioned it before, but we won't go there. But this tutorial on Django, what I would like us to do eventually, since you're going to have to learn how to deal with tools like VSCode and debugging and doing merges and version control and stuff in VSCode and running in it and learning how to run unit tests and everything. We can set up a Django project. According to this tutorial, we can also push to GitHub, a version control third-party repository, learn how to track changes, learn how to do pull requests. And we will eventually deploy to another site. So that's the plan. To be perfectly honest, I haven't done much of this stuff with Python. My team deploys, like I said, we're C#, so I'm familiar with the C# development environment and stuff. So I'll have to learn as we go here as well. It's not bad. I've wanted to do Python Django for a while, just because I like some of the way in which Python does things. I think it's very clean. I'm also interested now that I have much more experience as a software developer. Out of college, everything was still a little bit mysterious because we didn't really we didn't study frameworks enough in college to really properly understand them. I mean, I had a web development class where we did a little bit with Django, but we didn't spend the time we needed to really have a full, deep understanding of it. So that when I started my job, I still had to learn a lot on the job about how web apps really work and how you pass data from all the layers in a web app and things like that. So I don't want us to get too off topic here, but when we set all of that up, we will probably make the jump here from doing things here in this special environment that sets up all the packages for you. So down here at the bottom, for the files, packages. So right now, we actually aren't importing any packages where we need to install things. Python has a package manager. It's called pip. And it does have package versioning and stuff. But once we switch to desktop, we will be switching to desktop primarily to do version control. So I am a huge fan of staying in this environment right here. This website, replit.com, this is one such online environment. There are others. I did some initial research and just picked one because past a certain point, I think they're all kind of similar. But what they let you do is they let you focus on the mechanics of programming without having to worry about downloading Python and getting Python to run on your executable path and dealing with packages in Python. Everything is completely automatic. And for a long time, that is very beneficial because it's really scary if you're an intro programmer to have to figure out how to install the programming language and get it to run because it's kind of surprising to me, but honestly, the process is usually kind of complicated. It doesn't just work. At least that's been my experience, having installed, Java and Python and things like that on several computers over the years, is that sometimes there's an error that pops up. And if you're not already a programmer accustomed to how do I fix this angry red error message from the computer, it can be really intimidating to people. Okay, anyway, sorry, I went a little bit off topic there, but you were asking about running things. So in VS Code, there's, usually in the menu, at the very least, if you can't find a button in the interface, there will be something in the file menu for run. And specifically, you'll want to debug, but that's the default in both VS Code and Visual Studio, I think. So we'll talk more when we get there. Python is still an option. We could also do .NET. Like I said, I'm actually much more comfortable in the .NET framework just because it's what I do in my day job. But it's up to you.
I already started with Python, so I figured I might as well finish with it. Or do you mean the Python IDE, ideally?
What do you say?
Do you mean Python, the language?
Yeah, so .NET, C# is a programming language, and .NET is a framework within that language for web applications. Specifically, it's the backend part of it. Django, which I've mentioned, DJANGO, is a web application framework for Python, the programming language. And what I was saying is that I think I mentioned this up front, is that I'm going to have to be learning some of how do you do this thing in Python and Django, because I know how to do things better in C# because that's what I actually use in my day job. So the point here was that past a certain point, I'm going to have to be learning right alongside you because I won't know how to do it in Django. And
that works for me.
My understanding is that some of the information is a little bit different. I mean, it's not like they both do similar things, but where things are in Django, like where the configuration files are, how you set up your database models. We'll get into all of that eventually once we do web programming, but it's probably going to be laid out a little bit differently and operate a little bit differently. And it's going to be new and unfamiliar for me as well. So, I mean, of course, one of the benefits of experience is that, well, even if it's different, I still more or less know how it works. So that's a big advantage, of course. It's one of the things that you get better at as a programmer too. Once you've been a developer for a while, you kind of get a spidey sense. You kind of get a feeling for things so that you don't get as wigged out and intimidated anytime you have to pick up something new, because you can usually find parallels to something you already know. And, whereas the very first time you're downloading things, it seems like there's so much to keep track of and you have no idea where to even start, right? Drinking from the fire hose. And okay.
But I'm fine with the whole Python approach for now, since that's the one I already got my feet wet with. So
okay. At some point, it won't be a bad idea to push yourself and pick up a second one. Like I said, I'm being a little bit of a hypocrite here because I mostly only write C#. Well, actually, that's not true. I write C# and I write TypeScript, which is JavaScript. Well, it's a specific, strongly typed version of JavaScript. I write lots and lots and lots of JavaScript as well. And you will have to learn JavaScript as a web developer. There's no way around it. If that's the path you pick, HTML and CSS for that matter as well. I was kind of having a start there a little bit, if you remember, but we switched into Python a little. But if you want to go the web app route specifically, you'll have to learn those three as well.
Okay.
So at any rate,
I fully expected to pick them up eventually, but I thought get comfortable enough in Python to be able to tell, like you said, how things work generally, so that in another language, I'm just learning a different way to do the same things.
Yep. And Python, in my opinion, is one of the very best languages to do that, to get that first basic understanding, because Python doesn't make you do a lot of extra stuff that you have to kind of wave your hand at. And, like some of the syntax is cleaner. So it kind of looks a little bit more like English than most programming languages do. Which generally makes it easier to conceptually understand. So I'm a big fan of Python syntax. Some people aren't. Some people don't like having everything broken down by white space or whatever, but I'm fine with it. And so I actually like Python a lot. And I think it's one of the better, or if not the best language to just get your feet wet in. Especially when you run it in environments like the one that we're using here, where you can just press the run button and you don't have to worry about versioning your packages or anything else like that. I will try to figure out the best way for us to pivot. I will say that I'm going to put my foot down and we're going to do practice for a while, because I think a lot of people try to move on too fast. And until you can start knocking out functions and problems and finish programming exercises rapidly, as in not that you can get it done eventually, but you can get it done in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then I think we're going to want to just keep doing practice, because until you get that meat and potatoes part of programming, you really should stay there for a while, is what I'm saying. And in some ways, I feel like, I don't want to say I moved on too fast, but in college, they teach you this conceptual framework of a lot of things. And if you're kind of shaky on the basics, if it takes you a long time to do the other things, the whole process becomes much more frustrating, because then anytime you're trying to do something new, not only do you have to deal with the new information, but you also have to just deal with the fact that you're really slow. Every time you have to do something, even if you can do it, even if you have the knowledge required to do it, it just takes you forever. And then it makes everything very much more frustrating.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So
Okay.
there is a sense in which it gets boring if all you're doing is problems of the same type. But eventually, I mean, I don't know how long it takes, honestly, because I didn't learn programming the way I'm teaching you, which is a very hands-on, get your hands dirty quickly, basically trying to teach you only the things that you'll mostly use and just ignore everything else, like the theoretical framework behind it, as much as we can, just because you don't actually use it day to day. That's kind of the approach that I've been trying to take here. I don't really know. I mean, and different people are different too, but I don't know exactly how long it's going to take before you get to that level of you kind of get a feel for how to solve problems such that you do it quickly and efficiently. Like I said, I don't want to, you can control the pace some, but I am going to, what's the right word?
I agree with what you said.
Argue for a degree of comfort and familiarity, just generally with solving problems before we move into other things. Just because I think it's really important to be firm on the basics, because once you have that, then the rest of it, honestly, is kind of just applying what you already know in slightly different ways. But if you're not up to speed on the basics, well, then no matter what situation you face, you're going to have problems, right? So I think we want to be coming from a place of comfort and familiarity. And this is a big problem, I think, in terms of people sticking with the programs that they try to learn, is that they try to do too much too fast and then they burn out. It's much better in a teaching sense to have a student go more slowly but get 100% on all of their tests than to have them go fast and end up passing everything. So maybe they get a 70% score, but not really understanding it, right? The second approach, unfortunately, is the one taken in a lot of public education. Oh, let's just get the passing scores. Let's not go slow. We have a set of curriculum we have to get through, and if people aren't understanding, well, too bad, so sad, because we have our curriculum. When you are trying to learn and have people actually enjoy what they're doing, it's actually moderately enjoyable to be able to be given problems and then to actually fully understand them top to bottom, be able to hammer out the code, be able to explain it to someone else. Here's what this is doing. Here's why I did it this way. Once you're able to actually successfully solve the problems with the knowledge you have, you feel like you've gained something, right? You feel like you have a skill and that you've made progress. And it's much more satisfying as an intellectual process of learning than kind of going too fast and only half understanding things. So I'm not going to belabor the point anymore. I bet you get the idea.
Yeah, I do.
We don't want to forego practice and turn up our nose at it, just saying, well, I already know more or less how to do this. This is boring or whatever. Because until you demonstrate that you can do it quickly, we should stay there. because it's really not a matter of conceptual. What I will try to do perhaps at some point is switch a lot of the problems that I'm giving you right now. I am literally sitting there. I'm thinking for like 30 seconds to a minute, and I'm trying to come up with some sort of situation that lets me test whether or not you understand a certain thing. But like the situations are pretty contrived, right? Like, here's the ones with loops. Like, so I made a function, a very fake make pretend thing about you working at a zoo, and your management gives you a new critter and you have to stick it with either the birds, the mammals, or the reptiles, or if it's not any one of those things, you say none. Like even in the real world, someone wouldn't use something exactly like this. But I mean, they might do something, where they try to categorize it. But I mean, like it's pretty fake, is what I'm saying.
I think it's a great way to start to think like a programmer. If I can actually approach any problem, whatever it might be, even if it's yeah.
Well, I mean, I wasn't trying to throw myself under the bus here. I mean, this is fine for what we're going, but what I'm saying is, as we move into more and more and more practice to try to get you up to speed, what I will try to do is write the problems in such a way that they are similar to things that you might actually encounter in a real situation. So for example, one of the things that I'll do, like I said, what I would really like to do is see how easy it is for me to set up a database in this environment. I mean, they have a database tab. I don't know, like, oh, see, this doesn't look so bad, right? But if I just haven't looked into it, because, actually on my project, even databases are, at least like the specifically setting them up in the framework form, they're actually something I'm not the strongest on. I know how to use them once they're there and they exist because I've mostly worked on applications where a lot of the initial scaffolding has actually been set up already, and I'm just contributing to something that already exists. So, but at any rate, once we get a database set, we will do plenty of practice pulling data from the database and doing operations on it, because that is, if you write backend stuff, if you're writing the backend part of a full stack web application, that is almost entirely what you do. You get a request from the front end. You might have to figure out what exactly the user is doing, but then almost 100% of the time, you'll make a call to the database. You'll get some stuff from the database. You'll do some logic, so-called business logic in the service layer to, I don't know, does this user have this permission? And if so, they want the data in this form, things like that. You'll do a lot of processing of the data, and then you'll send it back to the user. At a high level, that's how the web framework, that's how a web app handles requests, is that the user will do something, and then that request will get sent to the backend. The backend will do stuff, and it will send something back to the front end. Okay. So I actually want to get to the thing. Like I said, I actually have to run faster today. So, well, I will attempt to go over the high level of loops in like 20 minutes. We'll see how well I do here. We've already used some for loops. Now, there's two important things about loops, is that there is a for loop that goes over indices, and then there is a for each loop. Now, Python actually defaults to a for each loop. So if I have I make a list called list of numbers, and we just put in random integers here, something like this. Python's default loop is actually, or not default, I would say the most common way that people think about things in Python is usually to do something like for number in list of numbers, like that, right? I'm assuming you've seen this notation before, right?
Yeah, I've used it too.
I actually think that this is probably one of the more common ways to do it. So here, let me. Okay. So this is the part where we are right now here. So well, that is a pretty easy way. Now, the thing is, you're not actually directly indexing into this list. It's kind of doing it implicitly for you. So you're getting each thing in the list, and then you can do things with that. The other kind of for loop, and Python, I don't want to say it's strange in how it does this, but a lot of programming languages, like almost all the ones that use quote unquote C-like syntax, so this would be Java and C++ and C# and languages like that, well, they all have a loop. They're typed languages, so you have to give things a type. That I think I've written this out before as well. Like they all have a for loop that looks something like this. And so you start out with an initial value, and then you do something for the length of the list, then you increment the now you don't just have to do plus plus, you can actually go like over something like that. If you want to do every third element, you can do that or whatever. But they have for loops that look like this. In Python, you actually use a function to generate the indices that you go over. And so you would do, you actually still use the in here, but what we would do is we would do in range, and then what range does here, do you see the function definition that is pulled up here?
Yeah.
So this is very useful when you're inside of development environments like this one or Visual Studio Code or whatever. This is called documentation. This is the documentation for the range function that pulls up. At least here it pulls up automatically when you are inside of the function argument list. So this function, here's what it says. It says it returns an object that produces a sequence of integers from start. So start is one of the arguments. So there's a start, a stop, and a step. You see? So the function, as you see here, it says that start defaults to 0. So if you don't give it any start value, there's two ways to call this. You see this top one has just one argument for stop, and the bottom one has 3 arguments, right? Although you see that step is optional. If you call it with just one argument, it thinks that it interprets the arguments you give it as the stop value, and then it interprets step as 1. And so if you call this with range 4, it will produce integer indices up to but not including the stop value. So range 4 will give you 4 numbers, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And it so happens that the way in which you would have a list, like this list, you see has indices 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So it has a length of 5. But we don't want to hard code the length. The way in which you almost always call this on lists would be to get the length of the list like this. So this function right here, len, this is the length function in Python. This is how you get the length of the list. And so if we wanted to so we're going to print the index and then add a couple spaces. And then what we are going to do is we are going to get the number at this index in the list. So can you tell me, how would I get the number at this index in this list of numbers here?
How would I get the number in the list?
Mm-hmm.
I've done that before. I would use the name of the list and square brackets, right?
Numbers, square brackets, and what goes in the square brackets?
We put in the index of the number I want to get.
Like that, right? Okay.
Yes.
Good. So if we run this, so this is saying it can't concatenate a string, or it can't concatenate an integer to something of type string. So just so that, because we're short on time, I'm going to show you what the right answer to this one is. There is a function in Python called str string that will convert whatever you pass into it to a string data type. Called toString method. And that's what we need to do here, because the things that we're working with are integers. So you see, that's what we just did. First, we printed out the index, and then we printed out the thing in the list, and then the other numbers are coming down here from this. But this is the basic way in which you would use a for loop in Python. And the most common circumstance for you actually wanting the indices, most of the time, it's actually easier conceptually to just use this one, the for each loop. When conceptually you might want to use the actual for loop itself is if you have two different things that are tracking something, and you want to match the indices in them. So, like, let's say that we had a second array here where we were tracking as strings the written out form of all of these. So we have 1, 6, 8, 3, and 9, like this. So are you seeing the difference between these two arrays? Well,
yeah.
Let's say instead of printing the index, what we want to do is we want to print the English form of the numbers. What would I, well, actually, I don't even need the string here. What would I do to now, we're gonna go over all of the indices in this array. And you see these things happen to be the same length, which is why we can do this. So how would I get the English form of all the numbers in order when I'm printing out all of the things in these arrays or in these lists here?
You get the
It's not a trick question.
Yeah, I know. we want to rearrange the list to print out in order, right?
Well,
That's it.
It's going to print out in order. Okay, this is the same question I was asking you before. I was just making the point that it's now we're doing it for a different list is all. So I was just, it's the same indexing thing, except this variable here has English on the end, right? This is the second list here. And that's all there is to it. These lists are of the same length, which means when you enumerate the indices for one, they're going to be the same as the indices for the other. And you'll see that this will actually print out in order. It will print out just like that.
Okay. So what you meant by order wasn't that it had to go from high to low or from low to high. Just it will track both lists
at the same time. And the problem is, if I wanted to print out the numbers in English, how do I do that? How do I do that over here for number in list of numbers, print number? How do I deal with the numbers in English variable as well over here? The answer is there's not a great way, right? Some other way in which you might see this. So have we done anything with dictionaries yet?
Not yet, no.
Okay. Well, I was going to use an example from dictionaries as well, where you can like enumerate the keys, or you can do the keys and the values. Well, we won't do that quite yet, although I will teach you dictionaries at some other point. So do both of these make sense, what we're doing here and what the range function does?
Yes, they do.
So let's do something a little bit different now. Let's make a, I've only got about 10 minutes left. Second list. And let's make this one just numbers ascending this. Okay, so let's say we wanted to print out all of the even numbers in the list. So that is 2, 4, 6, so forth. So let's write another for loop that will actually print out numbers. So we said that the index function, if it not the index function, the range function can take in just one thing. If it takes in that one thing, it takes in the stop value and starts from 0 and increments by 1. But it also has that other form where we have a start, a stop, and a step. So if we want to get, actually, let me start at 0, not at 1. If we want to get all of the even values and the order of the arguments is start, stop, step, how would I get indices 0 and then indices 2, indices 4? So this is index 0, this is index 2, and this is index 4. So how would I get the values corresponding to those indices in this list. Let me pull up this again.
Okay. So, okay. What we want to accomplish right now?
Let me make this a little bit clearer so that we're keeping the values distinguished from the indices in our head rather than them actually being the same thing. Let me make this a thing of lists here.
Okay.
I want us to print out the values 0, 2, 4, and 6.
0, 2, 4, and 6. Okay.
So how can I, the string values from this list, how can I go over the list and print out just those values, just the even values, using some input to the range function here?
We would use, I'm sorry, I want to check it myself. So, okay. Okay, so we would use 0, 6, 2.
Okay, so start stop step, and let's see if this works. So would go down in the would just be the, and then we are going to do second list of numbers and then index into it like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what, let me just comment out our previous for loop examples and let's see what we print. So we would expect 0, 2, 4, 6, right?
Yeah.
So you see how we didn't get the last one? Can you figure out why?
Okay.
It has something to do with this second parameter right here.
We were supposed to get 0, 2, and 6. 0, 2, 4, and 6.
Yes, that's correct. But we didn't get
0,
6.
2. Okay, we didn't get 6. 0, 2, 4, and 6.
Let me pull up the documentation again.
Yeah. 0.
So you see how it says start and then it has in parentheses inclusive and stop exclusive? Do you know what it means by that?
Not sure.
Okay, so in math, if we have something that is like 0 is less than x,
okay, yeah,
0
I get it.
is less than x is less than or equal to 4. This means that
Yeah.
x could be values 1, 2, 3, or 4, but not 0 because that's exclusive and this is inclusive.
Yeah.
Right.
So it should be 7.
In our function, if we place the numbers with these, this is what is meant by that. So
yeah. Yeah, it should be 7, not
so now
6.
if we go back and we look at what you've done, it says that stop. Well, actually, sorry, I did that backwards. This is what the function is. So if stop is exclusive and you give it the value 6, what does that mean? Does it mean that x can be 6?
No, it means that x can only be 5. It won't be up to 6.
Mm-hmm. So if we want to be able to capture the 6th index as well, what can we change that?
Yeah, we change it to 7. So 0, 7, 2.
Yep. I believe index 8 would also work because you have the increment here of 2. What would not work is if we were to do like index 10, because then we would be doing 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. However, there is no index 8. And so what we should get is an index out of bounds error here. Yep.
Ooh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
because,
I wouldn't have expected that.
Well,
it does make.
It's because there is no index of that value in this list. Because if you look, we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 indices in the list, right? Which means a total of 7 things. So 0 through 6 are the indexes, but we have 7 items in the list. And so if we try to get something that is past that, so 0, 2, 4, and 6, well, there is nothing at position 8 in the list, which is where we would index the next time we increment by 2 after 6, right? And so we're trying to access something that doesn't exist. And so, of course, it's going to throw an error at us here. So out of habit, I typically try to, if I'm doing a start-stop step, I think it's actually really confusing to have 7 here because there will never be a 7. Conceptually, 7 will never be hit with this start and this increment, right? So I like to go to the next increment past where you go because I think it makes the more sense. So then we'll go 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and we will just never hit 8. It's the one before the one we do because it's exclusive like this.
Okay.
All right. So if you want a really quick to do here, I have to leave because I have to go to work here a little bit earlier today. But see if you can figure out how to get only the last 3 elements. So range also lets you specify a start, right? And right now we've been starting from index 0. But if you want to only get the indices 4, 5, and 6, how can you do that given the range function? So it's gonna look exactly like this, except now you need to figure out what you need to put in there to accomplish this. That will be a good to do for you here. I have to go to work now, but we'll pick back up. Right now we're doing really easy stuff with loops. We'll pick back up tomorrow. Keep going on loops. Right now we're doing for loops, while loops, taking a conditional or like a Boolean expression that evaluates to true or false, and they'll keep going until whatever you give them is false at a high level.
Okay.
But we'll pick back up tomorrow and keep going on loops. So I will talk to you then.
All right. Thank you.